A little while ago, I made a decision to stop covering as many or maybe any wireless earphones and headphones. And yet here I am sitting with a box of wireless headphones on my desk. And the reason for that is that when Edifier agreed to send me out a pair of R1280DBs for review here, they asked me if I'd also take a listen to their wireless headphones. These are the W820NBs, and I have to say I've actually been really impressed with them. For $70 they offer Bluetooth 5.0, they've got active noise cancelling, a titanium diaphragm driver, which doesn't necessarily mean they're great, but what I can tell you is that it does translate into a good sound, and they're also comfortable and compact. So this isn't actually an ad, there's no sponsorship for this. But Edifier did ask me to take a listen, and so I'm just inserting a brief moment here to share with you my thoughts on the W820. And that is to say, I think they're a really impressive headphone for the price. If you've watched a lot of my reviews, you'll know that I'm not one to give praise where praise isn't due. And so when I say that I think these are a good choice at $70, I really do mean it. I'm not going to go into depth about the sound quality of these, but what I will say is that they're absolutely up there as good or maybe better than some of the comparable products at the price. I've tried a few in recent times. You can check out my roundup of a bunch of wireless headphones recently. And all I'm going to say at this point, so I can get on with the main part of the review, is that I think these are definitely worth the money and would have fared really well in that roundup had I had them back then. So if you're also in the market for a pair of wireless headphones, do check out the W820NBs. I'm not going to do a full review on them, but I'm very comfortable saying that for $70, I think they're a great choice. And again, there's no affiliation, there's no marketing or kickbacks there. They just asked me to have a listen, and these are my honest summary thoughts. So check them out if you're in the market, but for now, let's get on with the R1280DB review. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today a review that's a bit different from my usual because I'm looking at speakers for a change. Not passive speakers, I'm not set up to do those, but in this case a set of active speakers from Edifier. These are the R1280DB speakers. They're an active speaker with Bluetooth capabilities for just $140. It seemed too cheap for me, so I was really keen to see if they were rubbish or if they're actually great value. When I was hunting for a set of studio monitors for my office here to use for editing, video watching, general music listening from time to time, I did look at these Edifiers as one of the options, but I have to say their price put me off. I thought at that price, when other studio monitors are in the $200, $300 range, how could something for $140 actually be considered a viable option? And so when I reached out to Edifier and they agreed to send me a pair, I was excited to give them a try. The R1280s come in a few colours, I've got the black ones here, but they also come in wood grain and white I believe as well. But regardless of which model you get in terms of colour, they all have the same design, features and specifications of course. And so I'm going to run through a few of the key details and then talk to you a bit about the sound. This will be a quicker review than some of my others because I don't have a lot of comparisons to give you, but hopefully I can still give you a good sense of whether or not I think the R1280DBs are a good choice, and more importantly, whether they're going to work well for you. The R1280s come with a 4-inch woofer down the bottom here and a 13mm silk dome tweeter. While we're talking about tweeters, I noticed that on mine there's some fibres and bits and pieces stuck between the tweeter guard and the tweeter itself, and that speaks to me of slightly lower quality manufacturing. I don't believe it influences the sound quality, but there's no doubt when you look at these that they are a very cheaply made speaker. That's not to say they're bad, as I'll get to in a minute. It's just to say that you will notice some of the bits and pieces in terms of the finish is not quite as good as you get when you spend a bit more on a pair of speakers, like say a pair of KRKs or IK multimedia monitors. The woofers appear to be made out of a paper or some sort of composite dome, but I didn't see any specific explanation of what material it is, and again, it doesn't really matter. What it all comes down to is how these sound, and I will discuss that shortly. The amplification in these is rated for 42 watts RMS, and whilst that sounds like a pretty big amount of power for a speaker of this size, we don't actually know what the sensitivity levels are of the drivers, and therefore it again doesn't tell us a huge amount. What I will say though is that these had no problems at all filling a moderate to large sized dining room with plenty of sound and without breaking up or causing distortion. So you don't have to push these to their absolute peak and therefore into the realm of distortion and harshness to get excellent levels of sound and, without giving too much away, good quality sound as well. I'll talk about the controls and the interface in a moment, but a couple of final things to point out about the general design is that each speaker has a small port here for the bass. That's not uncommon. It's a great way to get extra bass response from a speaker like this. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that you've also got a setup where one side is active and the other side has your speaker terminals. So all the amplification is coming from this unit, and this unit then is just a passive slave taking the signal from the right-hand speaker. So for now I'm going to put this one aside just to give myself some more space. Looking at the active right-hand speaker now, and there's a few things to note. One of them is this control panel on the side. This provides you with controls such as the tone controls for treble and bass, and also the volume for both speakers, and the selection of what input you're using. I'll talk in a moment about the use of the tone controls, but before we get there, let's have a look at the back to explain the inputs and outputs available. As you can see here, we've got a couple of line inputs, so you can have multiple different analog inputs here. You could plug in a phone or a portable music player of some sort. You could plug in a CD player, a streamer, whatever you want can go straight into here. In addition to that though, you've also got optical and coaxial SPDIF to take inputs from sources again like streamers, but this time allowing the internal DAC of the R1280DB to do the decoding for you. And I'll talk in a moment about where I rate the DAC in terms of quality within the R1280DB, but it's nice either way to give you so much flexibility. The final thing you can't see here is that there is a Bluetooth antenna, so these will also receive a Bluetooth input. They don't accept any of the high definition Bluetooth codecs, but in my listening, the standard Bluetooth transmission was perfectly fine for general listening. And again, I'll break down in a moment the differences I heard between Bluetooth, the internal DAC, and running an external source in so that all the processing is done externally and just the amplification is done in the speaker. But let me start first with just a general discussion of the sound quality from the R1280DBs. Generally speaking, the sound from the R1280DBs is enjoyable. It's a good solid sound. Straight out of the box, they're completely listenable. Personally, I did find I preferred tweaking the sound just a little bit, but the nice thing is you've got bass and treble controls there to do that. I found that running them without the covers on them did bring a little bit more resolution and space to the sound by letting a bit more treble energy come through. And so my preference would be that if you don't mind the look of them with the covers off, and if you're in a situation where it's safe to have the covers off, in other words, if you don't have a toddler running around the house poking his or her finger through the dust caps, if that's the case, then I would recommend running them without the covers on. If you do need to have the covers on though, you may find the need to tweak the treble just a little bit. As you probably gathered from what I've just said, that means that the stock sound with no tone adjustment at all is a little bit rich and a little bit warm. It's not by any stretch unpleasant, it's not overly thick, but it is tilted towards lower mid-range warmth. Despite the fact that these do come up in a search on Amazon for studio monitors, I really don't think they're tuned as a studio monitor should be. Now technically you can get them to come pretty close to studio monitor sound, but straight out of the box they're much richer and warmer than neutral. So don't be fooled by the fact that they come up in the listings for studio monitors on those sorts of sites, because I don't think they're really truly designed as studio monitors, or they'd be tuned quite differently. In my mind, these are a speaker that's very much designed for general listening, relaxed background music, maybe watching videos, general multimedia. That's more what they're for, rather than getting a mix accurate and true to source. Even if you use the tone control to pull back the bass a little bit, they're still going to end up having a bit of extra mid-range warmth, and that's going to prevent them from ever sounding truly neutral. But on the flip side, it's also what makes them a very enjoyable listen. I had these in our dining room for quite some time, and when I took them away to properly listen to them here in my office and work out my thoughts on them, my wife was actually disappointed to see them go, because they're an enjoyable, compact, easy to listen to speaker that fills a space, even a larger space, really nicely. I don't know that you'd have a party with them, but certainly for general, even slightly louder than average listening, they're great. While I'm talking about adjusting tone controls and things like that, I should mention that the bass adjustment on these is a nice low frequency adjustment. So even if you do crank the bass up a little bit with the tone controls, it's keeping the boost right down in the range. So you're not going to get too much bleed into the mids. Obviously, if you push it a long way, things are going to get a bit boomy and a bit bloated. But with a moderate adjustment to the bass, what you can do is get some nice depth out of these without making them overly muddy or overly thick. Likewise, I find the treble adjustment is pretty well placed as well. They don't get overly tinny if you increase the treble, and therefore what you can do is get just a little bit more sense of detail and clarity without getting too harsh. As I've already said, my preference would be to pull the covers off rather than adjust the treble, but if you can't do that or you need even more treble, it's nice that those tone controls have well-placed adjustments within the frequency band. And so I'm not going to go too analytical on the descriptions of these. They're not going to be the best imaging or soundstage presentation that you've ever heard. They're not going to have the most accurate tonal qualities. In general, they're a budget speaker producing a really nice, enjoyable sound. I've listened to some budget speakers in the past that have sounded really, really budget. And so I'm not giving these a pass because of the price. I'm still expecting them to sound good, and they do. They don't potentially have the detail and clarity of my KRK studio monitors, but they're also under half the price. And that's where I really emphasize these as a music listening speaker, a multimedia speaker, but maybe not a true studio monitor. Before wrapping it up there though, I do think it's worth stepping through the inputs and explaining what I heard as I move through each option, because the quality is going to vary depending on the input you're using. Starting off with Bluetooth, remembering there's no HD codecs here, it's just your standard AAC type codecs. The sound from the R1280DBs via Bluetooth, just running it from my phone, using Cobas at full resolution, so anything from Redbook CD 44.1 kHz files up to some of the high-res content on there. The sound from the R1280DBs was enjoyable, easy to listen to as I've already said, but it did lack some transparency, the imaging wasn't great, and the soundstage wasn't particularly huge. That said, it was nothing at all I would complain about. For a convenient, easy system in a living room, dining room, wherever you might want to put them, the R1280DBs are just great, particularly at the price. But that's not necessarily a good representation of their maximum sound quality. And so I tried them in what is probably a pretty ridiculous setup, running the line out from my Hugo TT2 into the R1280DBs here. Now that, as I said, is a pretty stupid combination. You've got $10,000 worth of system in the TT2 and the M scaler driving a $140 speaker. So I'm sure it's not really how these are intended to be used, but I was curious to see what their absolute maximum performance was. And it showed me that the 1280s here have good potential. The soundstage got significantly wider, the imaging got sharper, and general transparency and detail retrieval was stronger when using the TT2. So that is going to depend on which DAC or which source is giving the analog signal to the 1280s, but I think you're going to get very similar performance from most decent DACs on the market or decent streamers. Whilst the TT2 is a flagship level device, I think there's going to be a limit on these in terms of the maximum sound quality. That means they're going to sound pretty similar whether it's a TT2, a topping D90, an SMSL DO200, a topping E50. Any of those sorts of DACs I think are going to do just fine. As is the case with headphones, speakers, any kind of transducer device, it's always going to be the maximum limit on how well you can hear the source chain before it. And that's why I'm saying that the transparency, the sound staging capabilities, there's going to be a limitation applied by the 1280s. That means you're not going to need to spend top dollars on a DAC or a streamer to get great sound out of these. I would imagine something like a Raspberry Pi with an appropriate hat or a Volumio Primo type streamer. Any of those sorts of devices should do just fine with something like the 1280s here. And so the final test for me was to check out the internal DAC in here and see how well that performed given a digital signal. And the results were that it was definitely a better sound than the Bluetooth. So the internal DAC is a step up. If you can feed it optical or coaxial from a streamer, from a portable audio device of some sort, it's going to give you better sound than Bluetooth. It's certainly not as good of a DAC as a proper, dedicated hi-fi DAC like some of those I mentioned before, whether it's a topping, SMSL, SHIT, Chord, any of those. The DAC in here is a basic budget DAC, but it's definitely better than the Bluetooth, and it's plenty good enough for the general listening that these are no doubt designed for. For me, I think one of the optimal setups for the 1280s would be to grab a basic streaming device like a Raspberry Pi with a hat, for instance, and then output from that an optical or coax lead into the 1280s, and you're set to go. That way, all you're really seeing is a pair of speakers on a shelf somewhere and listening to great, easy to enjoy sound. But I was also interested to try one more thing, and that was I've recently received the xDuoo MU603. This is a Bluetooth tube-based DAC. So it only does Bluetooth, there's no preamping, it's just a Bluetooth receiver with a tube that converts the signal, outputs analog, and feeds it into your amplification. So I popped the MU603 on top of the 1280s, connected it up to my phone. The MU603 does offer aptX HD, so you're getting a bit of a boost in terms of the Bluetooth quality, and the end result was a really great sounding Bluetooth system. And that brings me back around to the versatility of the 1280s. You can buy them as they are, run Bluetooth straight through them, and never think twice about it. But because they've got the extra inputs available, they can actually scale relatively well, or I'd say very well for a budget device like they are, by simply adding a better Bluetooth receiver device, or connecting them directly up to a streamer, or an external DAC. And that's really, to me, where these shine. They're very affordable, they sound great, they're an easy listening speaker, they're not high-end by any stretch, but they're far better than they deserve to be for $140. The fact that they're compact, they look good, you've got a remote control included so you can have them set up in the room and flick between different inputs or control the volume without having to move back and forth between them. Everything about them just makes them a very, very easy recommendation. To be really clear, they're not going to set the world on fire on sound quality, but they're not intended to. These are a speaker that at a pinch you could set up as a basic studio monitor, recognizing that you would have to account for the slight mid-range warmth, or you could chuck them in a living room or a dining room or a bedroom and just enjoy great music. You can upgrade them with different sources, or you can keep it really simple and just pair it up to your phone. And that's why I'm a huge fan of the 1280s. I think they're a great option, and I think at $140 you really can't go wrong. So I want to say a huge thanks to the folks at Edifier for sending over the R1280DBs. I think they're a great choice if you're in the market and you're wondering about these because they seem too cheap. Let me reassure you and say they're a great speaker at the price. Don't hesitate to pick up a pair. You're going to thoroughly enjoy them, I expect. And so I hope you found this review useful. Hopefully I'll help clarify some of the questions you might have had before buying these. If I have, it would be great if you'd subscribe and like. It really helps the channel grow and keep sharing content like this with you. For now though, let me leave it to the music. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.